after some time he got good. I probably came across his articles, William Holstein or something like that.
So we're about to go live, and it's never really clear like how quick and how fast this is. So apologies to our viewers on the web. We're back or something. Yeah, there's only 4 of us today, so and this is not what we're doing today. So I'll just stop casting before I show something untoward. Right, so I was thinking we'd read the chapters 15, 7 to 10, that should be like, what, 5 pages, I think, ish. And then talk about what that means for, I guess, neuroscience, or however much we know about it. We have a viewer. Hey! Glad to know you're here. And it's not me. That's great. Right. I'll close the door. If anyone pops in late, we'll just talk now. And yeah, so we'll go through the chapter 15, 7 to 10, and then see what we can make of it, and what that might mean for other algorithms maybe, or whether this is all nonsense. Mm-hmm. Neural actor critic, and after that there's actor critic learning rules. That's a bit longer, I think, and then hedonistic neurons. I would also suggest that maybe we read 15.7 first and then discuss to make or remove any uncertainty or things that are unclear, and then go on to 15. that's the figure mentioned in So, I don't know what you know. My biggest trouble was to understand how the dopamine translates into this TD error. Like in this graphic here, where the TD error here makes sense because you've got a value function and then you've got the action and the resulting reward. You can calculate all of that. But how this here is how the equivalent is given here for viewers. Hey, this is really cool. And none of them is me. Normally I have to find out numbers. No, I'm a bit fuzzy on like how that works, like because at one point they say that dopamine is not meant to be as a reward signal, but how could it be if it's meant to be the TD error? But at the same time, it's supposed to be reward ditch. There's like a reward complex. Is that just because it's an analog and not fully working? I don't quite understand what's going on there.
It's like a little just vague explanation of what it might be.
Yeah.
I don't expect neuroscience to like comment. But
Yes, and I think there was also like lots of English specific terms about.
But in general, dopamine is responsible for bringing some kind of synaptic plasticity to the growing up neurons, right?
Yeah.
So basically, it encourages this region of the brain to be changed somehow. But it doesn't tell necessarily how to change it, right?
Yeah.
So mostly it's based, the changes itself depend on the activity of those neurons that were involved in that activity of the brain. So.
Yeah, so
But how would it know if those neurons did well or bad?
yeah. Well, that's why that's why I'm trying to understand how this would work. Like, would the critic element expect a lot of dopamine output? Yeah, and then therefore, if your action results in, because maybe also again I might not know enough about neuroscience, but maybe if your action results in a dopamine rush, does that mean that is this dopamine rush that we feel, is that coming only from this critic and so on, or is that something that is expected as the reward function? Yeah. So I guess, so if I snort a line of cocaine, which it seems to be what this study was about, that increases dopamine output, I suppose. Yeah. But is that on top of everything? And so therefore, does the critic completely underestimate the value function of this action, and then it overcorrects this way, and that's how addiction works? Ish?
Well, I guess, like, just using it as an analogy.
Yeah.
Like, you do the line of cocaine, you get a huge reward.
Yeah.
Dopamine or whatever neurochemical.
Yeah.
And that sort of values whatever action led you to that. In the same way, like,
Yeah.
you act critically.
I think they're like maybe two separate things, because with addiction, objectively, you know it's bad, and you know the true you shouldn't be doing this, and you should do something else.
But you can't really stop.
You can't help but do it.
That's the interesting part. I was wondering whether, when I started sort of suggesting this kind of this chapter, I hadn't read it yet, so I was wondering whether the actor and the critic were things like the actor being, for example, I guess the subconscious, something like that, and the critic being the conscious mind, which goes like, I don't think this is going to go well, and the actor's going, she'll be right, mate, and then jumps out of the plane without a parachute or something. Yeah.
I think it's like in this second last paragraph, it sort of talks about that like dopamine isn't like the reward.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like probably one of the, it sort of talks like different types of reward. Like the thing that I always know about the RL is that you only ever have this like one scalar reward.
Yeah.
So it's all the same.
Yeah.
Everything's like different kinds of rewards. It's like a difference in degree versus a difference in kind.
Yeah.
Like, whereas the brain probably has like a lot of different reward signals going on. Which is why like if you only had dopamine, you wouldn't be able to like plan more than like 5 seconds in the future.
Yeah. So that
And actually, just to add this planning, I think the studies on children are the two most successful probably people in general are the ones that can actually postpone the reward, and the more you can think long term and plan for it and actually resist the temptation of the immediate reward, the more successful you are. So.
So you can have a cookie now. You can have
Yeah,
2 cookies in
that's
10 minutes, and you can have a line of
example.
cocaine tomorrow.
Yeah. So most addicts will wait.
So that is okay. Maybe I'm sort of trying to jump too far ahead there with the learning that I was hoping for. I understand, but yeah. So the dopamine. That's how the dopamine could be mixed in. So sometimes it is a reward, but sometimes it also acts as the TD error signal where it enables the structure of the dendrites and so on to change. Is that again, that could just be a neuroscientific question there, but if I remember correctly, one of the things about cocaine is that it eventually numbs you out to like your dopamine receptors are either constantly depleted or you're not reacting to low threshold, like your threshold is really high.
As far as I remember, it just blocks some gates in your neurotransmitters.
Okay.
So, the way it works exactly, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Good question.
But there is we do get used to things. Like I think it's called the ramp effect. I remember reading this in William Gibson, where in the winter market actually in Burning Prom, that you can never get as high on a drug or anything else as you get the first time. Like, I remember saying to people, I wish I could watch Firefly for the first time again. Yeah. And is this kind of similar to what we're seeing when the critic learns and corrects the value function? Yeah. That the difference will never be as great, and we get maybe there's a separate circuit there that rewards us for finding something with a high difference, or is that the dopamine rush that comes from the correction of our value function?
I think there's probably like a reward system for novelty as well. So even if you have like just like one reward system for novelty and one for dopamine.
Yeah.
You just keep doing the thing that gives you dopamine rewards, like this gets less and less impressed.
Yeah. So you have you think it's about maybe like a hierarchical system, because I remember reading about hierarchical RL as well. I was trying to find RL that does work without neural nets, and there's like hierarchical temporal memory. And I have been trying to find something on stuff that works with that, and I came across these networks. And so maybe there could be novelty has a certain there's the immediate reward which outweighs everything maybe, and then novelty is like a sub reward that keeps you looking for that sort of thing. Could you have a chain or a network of RL systems, and not just a single agent?
Sure.
That's, I think at the point when they talk about the region of the brain where the critic and the acting happen, right? Saying that it's just like a static structure in the brain that involves in the learning of any kind of new skills and things, and it just keeps switching to different
Yeah.
tasks, or is it? I mean, you got my question, right? Is it just one thing that learns everything in the brain, that, or is it just an example of where it could be located?
Different parts of the brain are responsible for different
Yeah, I think there were.
parts of the
Yeah, but they mentioned just like this particular ventral and dorsal obstrium.
Stratum, yeah.
Stratum.
Yeah. I think they said that they've got where is it? They've got further literature in the appendix to this to chapter 15 where they point towards evidence for those regions actually having that purpose or that function. But maybe that's a good cue to go to that next chapter, because if we're looking at the learning, then maybe that's that explains how.
What you're saying about hierarchy, we definitely like a hierarchy of needs, like, you know.
Oh yeah, hierarchy of needs, yeah, but I mean, like, maybe there's a hierarchy of or like a nested system of reinforcement learning systems and different agents, and they might be like, what if one agent's action could be to reward another agent, that sort of thing. So where there could be nested or hierarchical agent systems, or having different reward functions, or different critics for different things. I don't know.
So you start, that's going to dominate, like,
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And value that, like,
Yeah.
more so than anything. But once you eat food, like, your
Yeah.
values change.
That's an interesting point, because I wonder if that's something that you learn. Because that is a really, really strong function, but the starving itself as a, yeah. So when you get the reward of food, I suppose we can't really switch off learning?
Pre-trained.
Yeah.
Thing is,
Yeah.
I would say that that's
Right.
still, it's like the you know the fact that humans are afraid of snakes is like a inbuilt.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably like all the humans who didn't have that instinct just starved to death and didn't.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And I think the other one is this being part of hierarchy. That's also like looks like ingrained in human behavior.
That would be testable, I would imagine, right? Because if you could find, I guess, a hierarchy of that sort, it's actually really difficult to think about in terms of maybe. Okay, so one thing is a hierarchy of needs, but the other thing, because that to me would increase, like, for example, the reward, I would think, yeah, that if you are starving, then food gets a higher reward. That doesn't necessarily, to me, indicate like how that could be totally independent of what the algorithm is on the inside, yeah. So I'm not really sure whether that depends on whether it's actor critic or not, and has these kinds of systems. What does that do to the learning? And does the learning affect more situations where, I don't know, when you're a kid and you're trying to walk, the reward there is very different, and it's not, there's no threat to life and limb and so on, necessarily, yeah? So, is the reinforcement learning situation, like this whole actor critic thing, is that more applicable to this kind of situation? Is there less learning involved when we're starving and then get a reward? Yeah.
I think we may learn in different ways. I think you can eat some things that you will think of.
True. Yeah.
Or you can find ways to.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. That's
Find food.
Comes back to you can't switch off learning. That's true. Yeah. That's right.
So it's like a repurpose for finding food.
So there might not just be a system of hierarchical agents or so on, but there might also be parallel agents which keep on learning because there's such a multitude of inputs. So it's many agents learning many functions at once.
Yeah.
And depending on the need of what we
yeah.
currently have,
Yeah.
we might prefer one agent or one
Yeah.
agent.
Yeah. And then there must be, sensory-wise, there must be sort of a reward modulating function as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that could be something as simple as, I guess, if you're hungry, then your I don't know, maybe your threshold for a certain receptor sensitivity or something decreases.
When you have a bunch of different hormones, so like when you're under stress, you get cortisol,
Yeah.
which like suppresses a lot of your other
Yeah. Yeah.
functions.
Might be interesting to talk to a.
Probably a neuroscientist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, might be interesting to talk to a uni that has a neuroscience department that does that sort of thing and see if we can. Sorry, but 15A. Mm-hmm. Oh, hey.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Sorry to interrupt
Oh, no
your
worries. No worries at all.
proceedings. I just friend mentioned it, so I thought I'd come and have a look.
Oh, we're getting recommended now. That's even more awesome. Thank you if that was one of you. We apparently have 3 viewers. One jumped off. Maybe they had to go to the bathroom. Or the reward wasn't high enough. Yeah. Right, we've already made our way through the first chapter of the subchapters, the 15.7, and I'm about, I guess, halfway through, maybe a bit less, halfway through the
15.7?
yeah.
Is this
In
Barto?
Sutton Barto, that's right. Yeah.
I'm up to chapter 13, but that's
Oh,
okay.
yeah, that's great. That's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, and so we're literally just reading it right now. So yeah, maybe if you want to catch up, might be able to jump straight into chapter 50.8, which we're reading right now.
Yeah. Is that not in?
Because no, that's just a graphic from the figure 15.5 is in the previous chapter, and because I figured because the chapter is referring to this to this model, to this idea,
Okay.
I just put it up. .8 is on page 398 in the
98, second edition.
in the second edition cropped version. So it's cropped.
Yes,
Yeah.
trimmed.
Yeah, trimmed. That's what it is. I knew it ended in ED.
Sorry, what was the number again?
It's 398.
390. That's not possible. Oh wait, I thought.
Oh, actually, it's hang on. It's 420. That's right. It's of course 420 in the PDF, but 398 in the book.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Suddenly it's like two different realities. Oh God, no!
Beyond my comprehension.
Wow. Just looking at this, did you not have enough Hebbian plasticity? The spike timing dependent plasticity was.
Yeah.
I don't know what Hebbian style learning is either.
Hebbian.
Yeah.
Fire together, wire together. It's
Fire
like,
together,
yeah,
wire
so
together.
when neurons fire,
Yeah.
and then they're connected, and then they fire almost simultaneously,
Mhm.
then there is a rule that they, in connection with this strength,
Between them.
yeah, between
Oh.
them.
So they got like
So
welded
but
together.
basically, it's almost like it's a directional thing. Like, for example, this is neuron 1, this is neuron 2, connected this way.
Yeah.
So if this fire, so and then you have a pattern that goes like this 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So these are just like fires of those neurons, right?
Yeah.
So that means that these two would have be like basically in terms of neural nets, artificial neural nets.
Yeah.
This weight would be increased. And the opposite happens when it goes like 2 down. So, or for example, when the number 1 fires, but the number 2 does not. So you just like save energy, you know. Like why would we even keep connection synapses between these two neurons if activity of this one doesn't contribute to activity on the second one?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's.
But you said the same happens from 2 to 1, or the opposite
Yeah.
happens from
No. If 2 to 1, if first neuron 2 fires and then number 1, then this would even cause decrease of connectivity between these two neurons.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't, again,
Yeah.
basically like in terms of energy consumption, it just doesn't make much sense.
Okay.
But this is very primitive explanation, so it's way more complicated. But intuition is quite simple, just like that.
Yeah. No, I'm trying to find where I was actually.
Yeah, I can go back to the neuroscience basis.
Neuroscience basis.
You don't have to be a neuroscientist.
No, I'm a mathematician. But I did do a minor, essentially, in human biology. Does that count?
Yeah, with me.
Which page are we at exactly? Because I just started reading at any random paragraph.
Oh, well,
58.
considering that Piotr's already given up, I'm not sure whether we really need to read it before we talk about it, or whether we can just go through it, maybe paragraph by paragraph or something like that, so that we actually make sure that we're all on the same page and understand it properly.
You can go back to this diagram. So actually,
That guy?
yeah, the right hand side. So like,
Yeah.
what constitutes the reward? That the reward is reward.
Yeah, still don't understand.
I think in a simple case, it's like hunger or pain. It's obvious. That's okay. It's not so obvious too, but it's like you're hungry and then you eat something. Yeah, that's a reward. But the pain, you're avoiding pain. That's a reward. But what constitutes the fact that if I, let's say, help you with something, help you better, and that's a reward. Yeah.
They would all count. So it's very open-ended, and depending on how you want to set up the system, the reward can be anything.
No, but in the brain.
Yeah.
In the brain, it's complex because
Yeah.
they are all rewards. In fact, anything that anything that you do repeatedly probably ends up being a reward. You think about it. Because anything can be habit forming, not just anything that's pleasurable.
But the
Don't
thing is
think
that
so. Like teeth flossing, I cannot do it for a long time, and I cannot get used to it.
Sorry?
And teeth flossing, I cannot get used to it. And
Teeth flossing.
yeah, I don't think
But
it's,
how often do you do it? Like do you
every day, and
every day? Yeah.
I don't feel like it's rewarding or like a painful experience.
And that's probably the only reason why, because if there's pain associated, then it doesn't become.
No, pain like a metaphorically, not physically. But I'm saying is like I don't like it. I know it like it helps me. I'm forcing myself to do it.
Yeah. And even with pain, you can twist that one around too. Like we were in Bangkok for a day on the way back from Munich, and the dude was like, I had this amazing Thai massage, and he basically turned me into a pretzel and back, and it was incredibly painful. It felt so good. Yeah, and there was this one point where he was like, I can't remember, like he must have been kneeling on my calves with like his elbow in my thigh, like this full weight, and it was incredibly painful, but I wasn't allowed to nod off because it felt so good. I don't know what was going on, but then again, there's probably a whole bunch of nerve clusters that are getting pressed. Yeah, it's tough, right? Australia is so windy and dusty that it's really hard to keep stuff clean. Like in terms of dust and so on.
Yes, I feel that pain when
Yeah.
I wash my car the next day. It's
that is. But coming back to reinforcement learning, the PowerPoint was not switched on. Damn you, Australia! Right, yeah, so now we've got power again. Oh, I say damn you, Australia, and the person switches off. Thank you. Awesome. Anyway, sorry. Right. So coming back to this graph, you were asking what the reward is, and I think the really difficult thing is to isolate this idea of the actor critic when we have such a broad idea of what learning is and when it occurs. Yeah. So for example, oh, what the hell? Why?
You're not active enough.
That's this thing. Oh, good grief.
Why can't you just press cancel?
But I can't, this is not a touchscreen, and there's no cancel on my machine. This is just, oh god.
Having the remote.
Yeah,
Such a negative. Jesus. Okay, fantastic. Anyway, where were we? Right.
So I think that as you were touching before, there's this they explained that we are trying to minimize the TD error, but how to square into that this exploration component. So yeah, you have this value function, but then still you know that you need to explore, so maybe you will find something better. That's I think.
That appears that is gonna be entirely the actor or the policy network, right?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
So you want essentially your critic to always find the best value, but then your actor is going to not always take the best value, and you can do that via like epsilon greedy or
Yes.
something like that.
Yes.
But not necessarily. You might also train your critic to be to get value of, like, basically you can just inject entropy of your policy in that particular state as just the exploration, like just in soft actor critic, for example. You also update your value function based on the entropy of the policy in that particular state. So that keeps your exploration up to the point, like. When
I think they're not actually getting this complicated. I think that's a far more sophisticated approach. That I don't think they're thinking this far in this idea here. That's why I'm trying to sort of scale this down to. I would think it's a difficult example if we wanted to, for example, apply this learning to a kid burning themselves on the stove or something. Yeah,
that's a good example.
That is a good example.
I don't know.
Because actually, no, wait, that is a good example because it's a negative reward. It doesn't really matter whether the reward is positive or negative, right? So the action was touch the thing. The reward is strongly negative. Yeah, and the critic must have expected what, nothing to happen?
Yeah, but you get some kind of small exploration bonus for them.
Yeah.
Right?
So kids
Just a
do
small
like
one.
lots of random stupid things all
Yeah.
the time, and then they figure out what's bad.
So their actor probably has a lot of entropy to start with, so they explore a lot. Yeah.
And critic might be as well.
Yeah.
Depending on the exploration, I think.
So
It's not a hill. They just use just one hidden layer, like one layer network here, like one unit for critic, just one neuron.
I think they mentioned
it's quite shallow, so they're just trying to show the proof of concept.
Yeah,
or something
exactly.
like that.
Yeah, I think they mentioned that they each stand for a vector or something.
They
They're not just a single layer. Yeah. I'm still trying to understand how the dopamine works there though. So you burn your finger on the stove, you get this huge hit of negative reward, and then you initially had, like in terms of the TD error, the TD error is of course massive now, and the dopamine, I think that's the part that confuses me. Like, it feels to me like dopamine is like gravity, like you pour out dopamine and then you've got it, bang. But how does your dopamine tell you whether this was a positive or negative reward?
That's what I asked before,
Yeah.
Still not clear.
Yeah.
I think so.
Dopamine's always positive. It's not
Dopamine's like a positive signal, but then you can get like, so your nerves
cortisol.
have a negative. So when you feel pain, your nerve endings fire.
Yeah.
And that's the negative signal. So it's almost like you have one signal for positives and one signal for negatives.
Or different parts of your brain do it.
Right. So why don't they include that here then? Because this
I think they're
not a
just trying to
complete
simplify.
Yeah. This is a single example, not a full implementation of that.
Maybe the dopamine is a learning catalyst, and that
because we were saying it's the this here because it's not the reward, right? The dopamine is not meant to be the reward. They mentioned this specifically that the dopamine does not represent the reward itself. It's also part of the TD error and the update function because it enables the plasticity of the brain. Yeah. So. Oh, wait a minute.
Anticipation.
You get it?
Yes, it's that. The dopamine comes in to enable the strengthening or weakening of the firing, and the firing of, like, in a really dumb way, I would imagine. Yeah. You touching the stove, and it feeling good, even, would be firing that way. And if that happens again, then this would be strengthened. But you expected the value to be high in this direction, and you get a massive signal 2-1 instead of 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. You get a massive load in that direction. Yeah. and the dopamine then enables the plasticity of the brain to strengthen this connection back. And maybe because it's not just a single pair of neurons, two ones, but many twos firing towards many ones, maybe that's the strong dopamine correction. Maybe that's how this works. Yeah. That would make sense, sort of, because then the dopamine itself would not necessarily be the reward in this case. It would just be part of the process of correcting, or, like, I guess it's not even backprop per se. It's just literally updating the network. Yeah.
Oh, you're right. Even if you close the equations they provided at 399.
Here.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can see that these two equations correspond to weight updates, right?
Yeah.
And those z's actually where the gradient comes from, not the TD error, which is the dopamine, which is sigma, or not sigma, delta, yeah, which is not delta.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Well,
These are the eligibility traces.
yeah, and that's the only place where the gradient, where the positiveness or badness of the actions.
Oh, right.
Not the TD error. TD error is here, and this is just basically works like a scale. A
And
scale
that's
factor.
what the dopamine does, right?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
a scale factor.
Exactly. That's right.
But where this gradient comes from, that's the question.
Well, the gradient would be.
Yeah.
No,
No.
it's S of t. So yeah, so the gradient is
The value function is just whether your neuron fires. No. 15.1.
I see.
yeah.
So
Hold on a minute.
what you were saying, that if your neuron fires, it's high value.
So you could have, I guess you could have had, should have fired or shouldn't have fired, and that's how they related back to this, to the logistic, to the here, yeah. So should have fired or shouldn't have fired, yeah. So the Bernoulli logistic, that's what.
So yeah, value function is almost like circular. Like if your neuron fires, you get it's high value, so it's more likely to fire.
Again.
Yeah. Habit? Is that how habit forms?
I do feel like we misunderstand our
Probably. We probably need a couple years in neuroscience.
Yeah, maybe.
So I mean, first of all, it doesn't really make sense that, like, dopamine is a neurotransmitter. All it does is it bridges the you've got your two neurons, and for neuron A to activate neuron B, it emits dopamine, and then neuron B receives it, and then that turns into an electrical signal along the neuron.
Not the dopamine. It's
Or serotonin, or like all the neurotransmitters. Like the point of a neurotransmitter
Serotonin
is
and dopamine, the only two things you really enjoy.
is that the point, so you can see that the point of dopamine is, like, dopamine doesn't do anything. It's just the bridging between two neurons. It's just, if you had a neural network and you have a unit, and then you have a unit in the next layer, and this unit is connecting to this unit, then the dopamine is essentially just that connection. It's just allowing one neuron to activate another neuron.
yeah, just like
I'll give the step here.
yeah, like opening the gates. No, it's just the classical view. It's just like here. So basically, dopamine is the guy that opens the door. So it lets the potential to come from neuron A to neuron B, like in a very simple way. But
I do remember it's like potassium ions.
potassium,
Yeah.
calcium,
Yeah.
nitric, yeah. So
I always confuse
Sodium.
those English as well.
That's sodium.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all good, but so then how is this all brain is structured? Because if like we have this path and if this path is cut off very early, so then physically the matter of the neurons beyond or further down this path are wasted. So if we have the line of million neurons and you're blocked at step 1, then physically the rest is not used.
So probably used by another pathway.
It's like a
Okay.
network.
So the analog of the TD delta is not really the dopamine, but it would be inside a neuron, and it would be this TD delta is the difference between what was predicted by the value function and what was actually experienced by the input, right? So it's almost as if there were two inputs coming in. One's from the value function, this is what I predict. One is the actual reward from the environment, and then what's the difference? And that's the output, right? That's the TD delta. So actually it would be inside the neuron itself. It would be a neuron that's essentially an OR, an XOR. No, it'll just compute the difference between the two, right? And that's your signal.
So the way they explain that here is in this hypothetical actor-critic brain implementation, the ventral striatum sends value information to the VTA and SNPC, where the dopamine neurons in these nuclei combine it with information about reward to generate activity corresponding to TD errors. That must be what you were just trying to explain. And then though exactly how dopaminergic neurons calculate these errors is not yet understood. The
That's what I'm having trouble
the TD error
articulating.
in line, TD error line in 15.5a becomes the line labeled dopamine in 15.5b, which represents the widely branching axons of dopamine neurons whose cell bodies are in the VTA and SNPC. Referring back to 15.1, this is the neuronal connection that we had there before. These axons make synaptic contact with the spines and the dendrites of medium spiny neurons, the main input-output neurons of both the dorsal and ventral divisions of the striatum. Axons on the cortical neurons that send input to the striatum make synaptic contact on the tips of these spines. According to the hypothesis, it is at these spines where changes in the efficacies of the synapses from cortical regions to the striatum are governed by learning rules that critically depend on the reinforcement signal supplied by dopamine. So would that be the amount of dopamine poured out increases, and therefore that gives the reward?
More dopamine, more signal.
Yeah.
In some sense, I mean, it's not the only factor. The number of receptors, dopamine receptors, for example, is actually another lever that changes.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, like your sensitivity to dopamine is based on how many of these channels there are. So essentially, you've got this. What it's saying is you've got these neurons all attaching to this one neuron, the spines, and they're all firing. And then it's calculating the difference. And the dopamine is where they touch. The dopamine is that channel is providing that signal across the, what do you call that? The gap between the two neurons. Yeah.
And that space between
Can I draw?
Yeah, go for it.
So it's supposed to be something like
That's what it's for. Please make sure that you use a dark pen so that you can see it. Maybe, I'm not sure if you can see the red one. Maybe, try to bring them in.
Yeah, but then if I use red and green, colorblind people will be like, I can't tell the difference. They can use the red one.
They can always
There's a blue one there.
use it. Oh, there's a blue one. Perfect. That should be the darkest. Yeah.
So and then you've got all these the input that comes from these, right? And this is this is the input flowing in. It's electrical signals until it reaches this point here, which is like you've got these channels. And so you've got the dopamine sit inside here, and then when there's enough electric signals to activate it, when it passes the activation threshold, these get pushed out and it sprays the dopamine into the gap, and then the channels absorb these and it starts an electrical signal. So as you said, that the sodium and the potassium, I think sodium gets pushed out, so potassium gets pushed in, and you've got there's a lot more. There's what do you call that? The jumping signal. The saltate. I don't remember what it's called in Latin. Anyway, like there's going to be multiple, and they're all going to contribute. So inside this neuron, because it's multiple and attached to the spines, you can have one signal, signal 2, signal 3, signal 4, or as many, and then computes the difference. And they're not sure how, and I'm not sure how either, but it computes the difference between these signals, subtracts one from the other. And
hang on, how does it compute the difference? As in, like, some of them pour out more dopamine, some of them pour out less?
Yes. Yes.
So it's kind
presumably.
of like,
but also the different sites will have different, where it connects also changes it, right? So your signal is stronger if you're closer. So there's going to be a place where this is the kind of like a neck, where the threshold where it's computed, and if you have something that's closer, that sends a signal closer, that's stronger, and this is weaker.
Oh, like from multiple connections?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And then like more dopamine as well. But the thing is, if there's going to be a limit, like once you flood it with dopamine, there's reuptake from the cell reabsorbs the dopamine, but that's a slower process. So if you fire too much, it saturates and you don't get a bigger signal. So there's a carrying capacity there, and then it computes the difference, which is going to be, I guess, the TD delta, the temporal difference delta, is supposed to be this difference in the biological cell. So once all the signals get to this place where there's a threshold, and then it decides whether this is like the activation layer. This is supposed to be the activation layer in a network. Where if it's lower than, so I mean, typically we use ReLU, and in ReLU, like anything that's below this, you get no signal, and then above this, you get some signal. Of course, it's different in a biological cell. It's not something like this, but actually, could very well be. We don't have a deep understanding of the like our understanding of neurons is very qualitative and not quantitative. But this is what I imagine that they're talking about, because this TD delta is the difference between expected value and actual reward from the environment, right? And essentially, this difference here is that some of these inputs are going to be sensory neurons, and some of these are going to be from, like, was it dorsal or ventral? Ventral neurons, which means it comes from the fronts.
I think this is only mapping into the dorsal and ventral striatum in terms of learning, where the sensory input would be, as far as I understand, is not considered.
I mean, like,
this is
all dorsal and ventral means to me is that you have like a
front
and the back, right? Of some long thing. It's like it's probably
so
just parts of the.
It doesn't matter whether it's pain or eye or
I mean, but the thing that's confusing here is that it makes the assumption that there is always going to be this input firing.
Always firing? Why?
Because can't you get sensory input without this?
But I understood that it's the critic, so your critic would be able to not fire if there's no value in the red. Right?
And this is just for like dopamine.
Yeah.
Like you could have like all other systems going, which would flow through those pathways.
But in the human body, is there always a critic that's sending signals?
Well, that's what they're trying to map, right? So the idea being that they claim that there's literature that shows that there's some evidence that this works, that supports this idea, and we're trying to understand like how that would work in terms of a sort of neural composition there. So I guess you could think of this as maybe noise, or maybe not noise, but maybe the initialization of your brain when you're born is the sort of what's the word? It's like a sparse matrix, and so the rest is not, maybe not zero, but sort of close to zero, randomly initialized. Yeah.
Well, I mean, for this analogy to hold,
Yeah.
it simply needs to be something that's firing all the time.
If you had, say you had like a bunch of these different systems for the different neurotransmitters, like you had one for adrenaline as well. Adrenaline is stronger than dopamine. Adrenaline's a lot like that. Don't worry.
Yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say, like, and then the adrenaline, the neurotransmitter version is more powerful than the dopamine, so it sends a signal.
Yeah, there's like dopamine R1, dopamine R2, and they've got a couple of hints towards these different sort of layers or stages or functions.
So if they're all sort of working, all the critics are going all at once, and all firing their neurotransmitters, and then whatever one is biologically stronger is the one that's prioritized when it makes jumps to gap.
Well, there isn't one that's stronger per se, but it would be whichever one the receiving neuron has more receptors for. So, and that gives you like, because there's going to be a saturation level, right? So if you have more receptors, that's more you can absorb before you reach saturation. So like, I mean, the ones you're looking for, like the most common ones are serotonin, dopamine, GABA. There are a few others I don't remember anymore.
But it still makes perfect sense to look at it at least vaguely, as a vaguely actor-critic model, because the saturation is similar to the clipping, be it entropy based or in any way sort of empirically limited. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to ask you that. I was just not in the conversation. So yeah, that's a thing that I thought might be
I think it's all like conceptually this actor critic
Yeah.
that makes sense, but the further it goes, I don't know. All like a cult.
Use it like
They're trying to force this analogy, but probably on that level it's called.
Yeah. Well, there's in chapter 14. There's a whole bunch of previous information about sort of possible TDR implementations in the brain and so on that I actually didn't realize they were referring to in this chapter either. So maybe we skipped a bit too optimistically ahead and said, we don't need any of that.
I mean, I would think that it would in fact be best to avoid any kind of analogy with the human brain, because we have such a poor understanding of how it actually fits together that it's kind of this dangerous rabbit hole that you go down, right? It's like
It's worth trying, I think. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I wouldn't I think it's interesting to try and see if this works, but maybe don't try and create a cure for something or a treatment for something based on this. That might not work yet. That's definitely not. As I say, does it have lead feet? Yeah, it has lead feet. Yeah.
I kind of agree. Yeah, I kind of agree with you. It's like it's a useful kind of analogy, but like once you sort of like start getting into nuts and bolts, it also kind of falls apart a bit.
I think at some stage you referred to random initialization of the brain, but actually how much of that is true?
No, I mean,
lots of things must be pretty fine. Like for example, the heart, the making heart beating.
So there's a certain system, but I wouldn't think that, like you were saying, something must always be fine.
Yeah,
so you couldn't have a zero, you couldn't have no neuron, right? Because if it's not there, then you must implement something to get it off the ground.
Well,
yeah. So there must be.
But I think this heart learning is
it's not a fact, but when you're just born, we have let's say 100% of our connections that's possible, and then over the course of our life we just lose those connections between neurons. On average. So the stage of, I don't remember exactly, but somewhat like 3 or 5 years, it's almost nearly half of connections that we used to have when we were born. Yeah.
Yes, you're sure? Is that physically the head is smaller?
But it's not the size, it's density.
Not the size.
Yeah.
It's density.
So you just pump the neurons up.
The number of synapses that connect neurons together.
I'm not okay. That's interesting, because that could just
eliminate those connections that we are not using. But
so what makes the volume if you have the same density? So
well, white matter, grey matter, and all that matters.
So
you have neurons and you have connections between them, and those connections are those actual physical things.
Yeah,
right?
I understand that, but now it's like a forgiven volume. This is what counts. But
that could just be optimistic initialization, though. Remember Remember the multi-armed bandits that were reaching the means of their values faster if you initialize them optimistically, so that they would keep exploring. So I think that might be why children try weird shit, right? Because they're still thinking anything's possible. Yeah, that might be why they're seeing ghosts and spirits and whatnot apparitions around the corner of everything, because their brain hasn't sorted these out yet. Yeah, which might be why, and completely leaning out on a limb here, but which might be why we're talking, or why many people talk about school killing creativity. Because if that's the case, then one of the things that school is doing is it weeds out many more of those connections instead of leaving them, and reinforces those that are for rote learning, say, for repetition instead of creative problem solving, that sort of thing. Yeah. So, and then that would explain a lot of these things, a lot of habits, and a lot of sort of the idea of not teaching an old dog new tricks and so on. Yeah. That could indeed be, so that would fit even more with the idea of reinforcement learning as we've seen it so far.
There's a danger of confirmation bias. Yeah, there is
Sure, I'm not saying it's supporting evidence. I'm not saying that means that it's more true or anything like that.
So the problem with going to babies now or infants is a lot of remodeling happens in between them and like adolescents, and in fact people who practice medicine on adults cannot practice medicine on children, because all the organs or everything is in a different place, so it isn't there yet, or their organs that are big and pretty much non-existent in the adult. For example, the thymus is in an adult is small and non-existent, in a child it's large. So there's a lot of remodeling, and they call this in developmental in child biology remodeling that happens, and so like you cannot even compare an adult with a child, because the bones, for example, can grow at any amount you want. It can keep growing. In adults, they have the plate at the end, that we form during adolescence. So like there's just tons of these things that change huge changes, experiences huge changes between when they're like a baby and when they're an adult. So we can't even think, like we don't have that experience. That's what I'm saying. Like it's just dangerous to think about children as if they were adults, because they're like completely different species.
Yeah, I don't see how that prevents us from speculating about
I mean,
how because this is a lot of reinforcement learning, and children are more learning than adults even. So it might entirely be, it might both work, and I'm not necessarily, I don't think that just because I'm not what's the word, dismissing your fact that children and adults are different, but I can still apply this to speculate on about what might be going on in the brains of both, because at the end they're both brains and one leads to the other, so there must be a relation between them. Yeah, I don't think that the learning mechanism inside the brain changes so significantly that you wouldn't be able to apply the models and see and follow those changes and see, okay, maybe could be, for example, that children's critics are switched off or something like that. There would be, because there would have to be a continuum of some sort. It's not necessarily like a butterfly where the brain just liquefies for a year or so and then suddenly puts itself back together, and then you've got the adult.
It might actually happen.
Well, I think that is quite unlikely.
What happens is, like when you hit puberty, the changes are so extreme that people essentially become a different person, right?
Yeah.
And this is quite well known.
But physically, right? You're still kind of, in the short term, you kind of the same, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that.
Well, in the short term, in from a day to day, sure, but then you look a year later and you're like, wow, this is a different, like.
Yeah, but it's a whole year of learning. It's a whole year of fine tuning your model inside to the changes that might occur to you.
Yeah.
So.
To your point about losing the neurons, connections, so actually, is there like an intellectual peak, or is it like you're up to, let's say, 25, 30, 35, you're at the highest level and then it degrades?
I have no idea if it relates to your intelligence or something. It's just like a matter of fact, like.
Oh, okay, so that's just like stating the fact that this is like physically there's like less muscle.
Peak-wise, it's very interesting. There are those that suggest nothing against mathematicians present, but that most mathematicians do their peak work before they're 30, I think 35, something like that. Like in their early years, guitarists tend to die before they're 30, 27 or something. Yeah, but many classical composers have this like sort of.
Even the clock 27.
Yeah. have this have this mature phase where they have, and you see this in artists as well, where you have the creative potential seems to vastly change and seems to mature. And you see this in writers, you see this in painters, you see this in sculptors and so on. So there's definitely something else going on as well. So it's not. I wouldn't necessarily say that you only peak once, so to speak, because I could imagine, like, as a mathematician, maybe you peak now, because, I don't know, maybe because you need the least sleep, the most sleep, whatever, but as a musician, you could peak much, much later.
Actually, that's a myth. The mathematician doesn't peak early.
Of course you would say that.
They grow strong. No, they actually, like, they grow in their, like, technical abilities over time, until they become senile at age 80 or something. But then most mathematicians do their best work around age 50-ish, actually. So, but they're recognized early because someone created the Fields Medal, which recognizes people, like you can't get a Fields Medal past age 30 or 40 because it's meant to recognize
is that where that myth
young
comes from?
mathematicians.
Okay.
So they get the publicity when they're young.
Okay.
And there's a lot of like prodigies, but then actually the deepest theorems come from people far into their careers.
I think probably it's happening like maybe in sports there's this trade-off of youth, maybe not all, but a trade-off of youth and experience. So your level is constant, and in these stages because you're young, physically capable, and then later on the experience takes over. So maybe that's the process you're describing.
Yeah.
But I think just what you said about the picking mathematicians. So I don't know, is it like maybe work on mathematicians? I don't know how abstract it is and how much you need to visualize, but like compared to chess players, it's actually where we need to do some mental imaging, and I imagine mathematics is probably similar. Yeah, that surely degrades with age, and probably the mental visualization of all the players is not as good as the young ones.
That's an interesting point, because with you saying that,
or maybe this acknowledgement that mathematics is not as need as much.
I would imagine
math
is probably similar there, because you have this over time as you learn, you have this recognition of you get this sort of more and more bird's eye view. I guess you could look at it as in both in a temporal sense as well as in a sort of multidimensional sense, if you will. Like you see everything and its implications more deeply through experience, right? I would be very interested in seeing how that would relate to the critic that we see here, and whether there's something going on, like for example a Monte Carlo research model or something like that that gets more skilled. Yeah. So maybe one of the things that AlphaGo say, purely going out on a limb here, I have no idea if any of this is true, but maybe one of the things that AlphaGo is not doing yet is learning to learn, or learning experience, in the sense that it can branch out further and further and further. As far as I know, at the moment, it has a limited depth, yeah, and it doesn't look further than that. Whereas what we seem to be able to do is draw on experience in the way that we can predict further or predict wider, yeah. So be it that we recognize themes and memes in movies to a degree that you can watch Deadpool 2 and he refers to all of these gags from other films and all of these ideas from other comics and so on, and you get like the third, fourth level implication of it, of what he's referring to, things like that. Or when you're playing music, at first, when you start out and you play the drums, like you can't even keep your hands and feet, for fuck's sake, right? And then after a while, you finally get to the point where you don't have to count to 4 anymore. It's like doom, bah, doom, bah, da da da, doom, 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 doom. Yeah, mommy, look, no hands, right? And then eventually you get to the point.
Evolution of
that happened during our holiday so often that we were on the autobahn. I was like, look, no hands, put your hands back on. But no, what I mean is you go through these changes, and then in musical terms you start sort of, and then you get a feel for the bar, and then you get a feel for the form. And like, for example, if you play blues, then you have, after a while, you have this feel for this 12-bar blues form, yeah. And then if you play different kinds of music, you get different feels for the different kinds of harmonic flow, and all of these things then become this bigger and bigger and bigger shape. Yeah? And the really crazy ones, the jazz musicians, they can play like rhythm changes in like 32-bar forms, and and they know where they are. They can literally feel where in the form they are right now, and so, and then come back around and they know exactly whose turn it is, and so on. And it's literally like the way Charlie Parker said was like, learn everything and then forget it. And I think what he meant is that it gets so internalized that you have this experience to draw upon. And I wonder if there's a different way of looking at that that is not captured by this those actual critic model.
Can you talk about like model-based learning, like humans are like super sophisticated models, like the world and other people, and if I do something, how it's going to react.
Yeah.
Like if I move this, like we can like plan all that stuff out, so we don't need to just do it because we know it's coming and happen.
Yeah.
And the difference is, AlphaGo is given the model from the start. It's given the model, whereas we learn the model from ourselves, and we each have a different model. as a result of that.
Even that, like the model, even after zero, like didn't give it like the actual model. Just
Yeah.
like it's incredibly like trivial compared to like forces
Yeah.
contact, like gravity or anything like that.
Yeah.
Oh,
That we
like
just sort of like know.
Well, like you said, it's in the multiple, like these figures, maybe one of the big problems with this robotics is the holding things. So this is like a maybe not the holy grail, but something that people try to solve.
Yeah.
Because it was like the operation of hand is so complicated. And
And it's also just the feedback, like, you know, you can give a kid that's like pick up the cup and they can do it, like, no worries, but to get like how your fingers deformed and like the contact between.
Yeah, but there is a huge prior before that, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
The kid needs to grow up to like
Yeah.
3-4 years
Yeah.
to be able to do that. And all the time she was learning
Yeah.
how to feel, how to sense things with his or her own fingers, right?
They do get a bit of a what's the word?
And they do have
There's a similar thing that happens. They learn to suckle, right? Some kids are really bad at it, and some kids are good at it, and it works like as far as I understand, harder or more difficult with some nipples and breasts and so on and so on, and so they have to adapt to the mother as well. And so I would imagine that must be a really complex feedback system to make that work.
Even like we can update our models like super quickly. Like if I pick up this cup and I expect it's going to be full of water, but and then it's not. Like I can update my model like what's going to happen really quickly and change like.
That's an interesting point. Wait,
Whereas
update your model in the sense because.
So my model in the world says that there's water in the cup, so it's going to be like heavy. So when I go to pick it up, I'm going to need a certain amount of force, and I'm going to need to do this. But when I pick it up, it's
I think it's like not you're updating model, you're using the different pre-trained tool.
Yeah.
How's that different? Yeah, how would that be different from the critic? How's that model different from the critic then? If you expected this to be full.
No, but that's kind of.
Oh, hang on.
That's right. It's just a mistake in your state perception, state expectation, and the actual state
so I get like
perception,
feedback,
right?
Yeah.
That's right. The state. That's what you're right. Yes, the state is the world is the model, and that's the state.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
And you can easily update that. I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, that's right.
So that's not a big deal. And that's probably why you wanna do Bayesian thing next, right? Which is just
that
about
would be pretty cool. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
But one thing that this probably can't capture is the fact that we specialize a whole bunch of neurons to do very specific tasks. And so like people who've done the MRI studies of like specialists, people specialize in things like chess and tennis and whatever, they have parts of their brains that activate only for that purpose, and there's parts of like the neural cortex that basically is able to recognize the chess positions as an image and make something out of that. And the thing with this is it doesn't get to change its network architecture, right? We can do some specialization, but it can't change its network architecture, unlike our plasticity, which allows us to go, well, we need this extra bunch of neurons here on this layer, let's just add them.
That's what it doesn't explain. But I think that's not the goal here, because that's like a meta step, I would think.
Yeah.
It's similar to the how the dopamine enforces this kind of thing, where they say, oh, we think that's what it does, but we don't know how. So yeah, true. It doesn't do it. But I also think that it doesn't attempt to do it. Like I think it's like a
gift. Maybe this density in that area of the brain is
a gift.
Gift.
God's gift.
we can go there.
What? Now we're getting a bit esoteric. Haven't lost any viewers yet? Okay.
No, but so how to explain that?
How to explain it?
So like the thing that some people are talented more in one thing and the others not. No,
well, that is
like
actually
as you
more
described.
But that's even more explained by these different brain regions that can be specialized on something, together with people's differences in height.
Yeah, but my painting area cannot be as specialized as the Picasso's, the painters.
I'm sorry, I'm just...
No, I'm saying like
understand it.
there are certain things that you cannot reach the level of other people. So how to explain that? So we can specialize areas, but my area cannot be as specialized as someone else's.
Yeah, one possible factor in this, and I don't mean explanation, but like one possible factor in this, that, for example, apparently, and Einstein's brain, if I remember correctly, is still being carried around in various slices around the world. Yeah, but apparently the visual part of Einstein's brain was larger than the adjacent linguistic part. I'm not sure how accurate these things still are in terms of when I first read about this, but he had always explained a lot of what he did visually and said words were not his thing. Yeah, consider that he was in many cases quite good with words. I can't only imagine how awesome he must have been visually in there. But it could very well be that with the different arrangements, maybe you've got a little bit more of some things and a little bit less of others. Like it's in like I'm a musical person. I love music. Music is just everything. Yeah. And so maybe there's just part of my brain that just got fertilized a bit more. I don't know. Or the two types of genes that came together when my parents combined just resulted in a slightly bigger lump on that end. Because there's always these recombinations, right? So
yes, I'm saying
that's
it's innate. It's not.
No, what I mean is when you get. It's not innate in the sense that because I have a big musical lump, whatever that means.
I think
it is not a tumor. Yeah.
If you have a lump, it might be a tumor.
Exactly. My lumps. But so I still might. If I think about this is getting worse and worse. Yeah, exactly. We've just lost a viewer.
Not even a beer yet.
The beer's outside. You can have one if you want. We're on an official meetup. We can access the beer fridge.
No, I'm okay.
So, the way I think about it is, if you think about like a cat's cradle, right? These things that you can span with your fingers. Yeah. I might have as many fingers in my lump, yeah, but I might not have the same cat's cradle between them. Okay. Yeah, and so the strings might get thicker and thinner and so on, but the way they grow will depend on the initial pattern that I have and the number of fingers and so on. So if, let's say, like me drawing, yeah, I might as well draw with my mouth. That would be 2 fingers trying to span a cat's cradle compared to, I guess, Picasso having 5 fingers. Yeah. So that's why I or you and me might not get to that level. Yeah. But even if we both had 5 fingers, the pattern that we start with might be so different from the other ones, yeah, that we're not getting to the point where you have exactly the same output or ability or whatever. Yeah. Not to mention that it's also quite unfair to compare yourself, because I think it's literally not 5 fingers, it's probably more like 5 million fingers. Yeah? And so the number of combinations that you can get will be so vast that it will be very, very strange if you suddenly have the same output as this particular artist. Yeah. So, but we compare ourselves to something that already exists, and then we tend to perceive the differences.
It's also the conditioning, right? Like, it's like comparing a model that has a training set that's 100 times the other models.
That's
right?
Yes, exactly. The temporal dimension comes on top of that, the backdrop, if you will, and the training set. Yeah, that's it.
Beethoven's father was like a famous musician, so was Mozart's father, and they both started training at age like 3, 2, something like that. So they were musically gifted, but at the same time they had that exposure long before you even started. It's probably the same with Picasso.
Yeah. And what people don't look at then is Mozart was probably a pretty shitty cook. You can probably cook a lot better than Mozart did.
Yeah. I think it's
that's what I have to tell myself.
I think I think it's sometimes like I think in as actually someone told me that story in the biography of Einstein. He was for his whole life he was suffering from the stomach issues. The reason for that was when they were cooking soup, they were putting eggs in it that were not washed, and there was some germs of bacteria on the eggs, and this was causing his problem. And he hasn't figured that out from his whole life. So how ironic. And I think they said the same stories with this famous physicist. I think, his wife also died, and he had to make connection on some of the tests she was making, on some of the results of the test. It was also like in the hindsight, it was a whole thing, but he can figure it out.
Yeah.
How's it called, the disease that you get from uncooked hair?
Einstein disease.
I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean salmonella?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that couldn't be permanent. Or maybe like there's like a low intensity salmonella.
That's just a parasite, basically. Or bacterial infection. Yeah. Cool, awesome. That is really, really cool. That went a lot longer and a lot more in a completely different direction than I thought we would go. Right. So for next time, does it make sense, especially with what Patrick said, to continue into the model based sort of RL part of the brain in the next? Because that's even shorter. Like this next chapter.
Have you read all the previous chapters?
No, not all of them. Only the interesting ones.
Only the interesting ones.
Yeah.
So what I found is like you actually do need to read most of. Otherwise, like I tried skipping and then I was like, oh, like you get lost really quickly because he doesn't write it he doesn't write it like an independent chapter each. They each keep from referring to previous ones.
Yeah. That's one where he referred to 50.
Yeah, but actually, I think it's quite often they state that here we refer to something, so it's not like they give you a chance to come back.
Yeah, but it just means that unless you really have a good understanding of the previous one, you kind of like limping past, but you don't really have that strong foundation, and then when you limp past like 3 different concepts, you're
I think that's like in any domain. If you don't get the basics, it's
But
I think we're okay with like all of the RL stuff.
So
we're all pretty good with all of the RL.
Yeah, the basic RL stuff, but not the.
Really,
Sorry.
Not me. I'm not good.
With the basic RL.
The basics.
Okay. But the model-based methods in the brain is literally like 1.5 pages. So I think if we take a look at that and then start reading the paper on multi-agent modeling, or like opponent modeling in RL, that might be interesting.
self-play.
I've got it. It's in the description for next week's meetup. It's not self-play, it's multi-agent play and hybrid team play, where part of the paper, or like the paper discusses how you model not just the environment, but model the other agents as well.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't necessarily be self-play, that would be like things like the
Dota 5.
The Dota 5 or the Quake games that DeepMind is playing, where they have hybrid human bot teams.
I play Dota, so it's like
just to finish off, I think I was referring to that in the past, where there's the Alpha Zero, when it was playing against itself, you had a certain style of play, and then was getting a bit worse with the Grandmaster, 10 Grandmasters, which were representing different styles to their set of play, and I think the same thing happened with humans. I was actually talking to some person about some games tournaments, and I was saying, in the past I was just for fun, I just entered one tournament, like a Quake tournament, back in the day, and actually, I was maybe not doing well, but I think that the other players were actually having trouble maybe not shooting, but I think this was like I was not jumping, like the racking jumps and avoiding racking jumps. I think there was like it requires other bit of adjustment, and they confirmed that it happens in other games that if there's an amateur that doesn't behave in a professional way, they obviously they will lose. But, that it takes some time to adjust for the professionals to finish them up. So I think it's like this like a deficiency of that program.
Well, the critic, the value that the critic puts forward for your
similar behavior,
Okay, well, I'm writing a poker RL, like the poker game RL, and I need to figure out how to.
So you're working for
do multiple.
Point?
No, I'm not.
I think this is what they do.
Oh, really? I don't know. It's just like because the
You might
book
do it as
does
well.
the book does blackjack, and then I was like, oh, I could do poker, I guess.
Have you spoken to Andy Kitchen about that? Andy, if that's you, talk to Joe about your.
I mean,
Andy Alcala. Oh, you don't know Andy Kitchen? You're in for a treat.
I don't know Andy Kitchen.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Who's Andy Kitchen?
You have so much to talk about.
Facebook thing that they play poker. Facebook.
Oh, okay. I have no idea that this is just like my little like. I did the exercise in the book for the blackjack, and then I was like, oh, I'll do poker now. Then
I think it's a bit more complex than.
I have to figure out, like, the hardest part is to figure out how to get. It's not even like an RL problem; it's a programming problem. It's like how to pass the game to multiple, like how to write it so that I can pass it to multiple agents, because the blackjack one only had one agent, so it was easy. It was like blackjack calls the game gives it the value, but then now I've got like how do I pass it to multiple agents and update the state, and like what's the best way to do that? Should I get the game to call all the agents? Like,
I think this is this problem. This is almost the next thing after Q-learning, when there was each agent was getting a copy of the environment and acting in their own version, and then there was like merging the experiences. The problem is surely solved.
I don't know how to do this.
What to look for, but
this is what I need to learn how to do.
Facebook. They just
When was this? Oh, July 11.
yeah.
I'm too slow. You know, if I did it a few months back, I might have.
It's still. I'm
Might
pretty
have
sure
made the
it's
news.
still a big deal. Like
If you can do it by yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Well, I wouldn't have to like. From like what I found, the biggest issue is computational resources.
Yeah.
Like it's just too expensive.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I've got a bunch of other projects that I'm working on. So.
But dear person on the net, thank you for watching. And as you can hear, we do awesome things here. So please join us again next week.
Who's this person?
I have
I'm
no idea,
so
which is
curious
why I'm
now.
so grateful. Yeah, exactly.
And about who's this kitchen person?
Oh, I'll tell you about Andy after the meetup. All right, see you next week. Hopefully.